Hello, dear friends. Today's date is January 28, 2026. The key event of today was a statement made by Ukrainian Member of Parliament Nahorniak. According to him, after Ukrainian men under the age of 23 were allowed to leave the country, more than 500,000 young people left Ukraine in just 6 months. According to the official version, most of them went abroad for education, personal development, and to search for future life opportunities. However, the unofficial reasons behind this mass departure, in my view, are obvious and require no further explanation. In addition, a certain confusion was caused yesterday by a statement from the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, Gerasimov, regarding the capture of the settlement of Kupansk Vlovi on the Kupansk axis. Today we will take a closer look at this issue and determine whether this settlement was indeed taken under control, or whether we are dealing with premature or embellished reports. As of today, changes have also been recorded on the Zaporizhzhia axis, with updates coming from the Pokrovsk and Sloviansk directions. Of course, we will separately discuss the situation on the Kupiansk sector of the front. In addition, fresh reports are coming in from the Vovchansk and Sumy directions. We will discuss all these developments in detail in this video. Let us begin our review with the Zaporizhzhia direction. A significant amount of news is coming from this area, some of which has already been confirmed. Today, video footage was published from the area of the settlement of Pavlivka. These recordings show the actions of an assault unit of the armed forces of the Russian Federation conducting offensive operations within Pavlivka. The assault group is taking new positions in the residential sector of the settlement. There are also reports of Russian forces advancing approximately 3 kilometers east of Stepnohursk, which allowed them to expand their zone of control in this sector of the front by a similar distance. At the same time, Pavlivka had previously already been marked on the map as being under Russian control, as forward positions of Russian forces had been recorded there, and confirmed reports of full control over the settlement had already appeared. In addition, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially announced the complete clearing of the settlement of Novoyakivlivka and its transition under Russian control. Earlier, information had already emerged confirming the expansion of the control zone and the completion of clearing operations in this settlement. But this has now been confirmed at the official level. The situation with Novoboykivske remains less clear. Earlier reports claimed that it had fully come under Russian control. However, over the past week, no confirming information has been received from this area. At the same time, it is reported that Russian units continue to apply pressure in the directions of Magdalenivka and the settlement of Zapasne. No significant expansion of the control zone has been recorded in this area so far, with the exception of one sector of the line of contact that was taken under Russian control several days ago. In this sector, the so-called pocket between Lukyanivsky and Novoyakivlivka was cleared, after which Russian forces began advancing toward Magdalenivka and Zapasne. There are also reports of a possible expansion of the control zone in the area of Primorsky, but at the moment there is no confirmation of this information. Nevertheless, Russian forces continue to carry out fire strikes against Ukrainian armed forces positions in the settlements of Richna, Veselyanka, and Malokaterynivka. Now let us move to the Orikhiv area. Reports of combat activity continue to come from this sector. As previously reported, and as confirmed today, an expansion of the Russian control zone is being recorded in Mala Tokmachka, as well as in the surroundings of Bilohiria. In addition, the Russian side is striking Ukrainian positions in Novodanilivka, Novoandriivka, and directly in Orikhiv. In turn, Ukrainian units are responding with strikes on Russian positions in the area of Mala Tokmachka, in the vicinity of Bilohiria, and within Bilohiria itself. The armed forces of Ukraine are also actively using FPV drones to attack Russian positions north of the settlement of Robotyne. Ukrainian FPV drone teams are operating quite intensively and are currently significantly constraining the advance of Russian units in this sector of the front. At the moment, the situation here looks exactly like this. Next, we move on to the Huliaipol direction. As of today, reports from this area are mostly unconfirmed. At the time of recording this video, no new evidentiary materials have been published. The day before, video footage was received from one of the sectors that we had already discussed earlier. In addition, some pro-Russian mapping sources have begun marking Russian positions in the southern part of the settlement of Zheleznodorozhne. It is reported that Russian forces have entered Zheleznodorozhne and expanded their zone of control from the Huliai-Pol side. However, at this moment, this information has not yet been confirmed. Nevertheless, such reports continue to appear, and it is quite possible that in the coming days they will be confirmed, after which the changes will be reflected on the map. It is also reported that Russian units are leveling the front line along the railway line. It is precisely along this railway that a consistent expansion of the control zone is currently taking place. Despite the fact that this sector appears on the map as predominantly open terrain, there is a significant number of Ukrainian fortifications and fortified areas located here, which Russian forces will have to assault and take under full control. At the moment, there are no changes on the map due to delays in incoming data, but in the coming days, information will certainly emerge. At the same time, Ukrainian sources still do not acknowledge the loss of Huliai-Pol. Ukrainian media outlets claim that Ukrainian units are holding the western part of Huliai-Pol and are also conducting counterattacks in this direction, allegedly pushing Russian forces back. However, this information does not correspond to the real situation on the ground. Previously, reports repeatedly emerged from both Russian and Ukrainian sources confirming the presence of Russian units at forward positions in the western part of Huliai-Pol. Therefore, with a high degree of confidence, it can be stated that Huliai-Pol is under Russian control. As for the entry into Zheleznodorozhne, this issue remains open for now. At the same time, Russian artillery and FPV drones are carrying out daily strikes on Zheleznodorozhne, Starokrainka, and the settlement of Horka. No new reports have been received from the Sviatopetrivka area so far. We now move on to the Dobropilya salient. Information from this direction indicates that the settlement of Novyi Donbass is currently in the active clearing phase. Assault operations are underway on the western outskirts of this settlement. The day before, video footage was published confirming the expansion of the Russian control zone by approximately 1 kilometer. It is also reported that the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting counterattacks from the Dobropilya side toward the settlement of Donbass, trying to push Russian forces back. However, Russian units have already entered Novyi Donbass, secured their positions, and the likelihood of their displacement at this moment is assessed as extremely low. Russian forces control Dorozhne, Ivanivka, and Novy Shakov, and are also conducting offensive actions toward the settlement of Vilny. The Russian armed forces have established supply lines and have reserves in this sector, so it can be stated with confidence that Novyi Donbass will ultimately come under full Russian control. As for the settlement of Belitsky, its status remains unclear for now. Several days ago, reports emerged about Russian forces entering Belitska and securing positions within the settlement, but as of today, no confirming materials have appeared. Therefore, this sector remains in question. As soon as reliable information becomes available, the corresponding changes will be reflected on the map. Nevertheless, the front line in this area remains extremely active, with intense combat and offensive operations by Russian forces continuing. The situation has also become clearer in the areas of Shakov and Sofiivka. It is reported that both settlements are under full Russian control. At present, Russian units are occupying defensive positions in the areas of Sofiivka and Shakov and are repelling attacks by the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukrainian forces are actively using FPV drones, striking Russian positions both in Sofiivka and in Shakov. Due to the high density of Ukrainian FPV teams, Russian units are currently not conducting active offensive operations in this sector. No significant changes have been recorded here so far, but if new data appears, it will be reflected on the map. Finally, let us move on to the Kostiantynivka direction. As of today, reports from this area are mostly of a news-related nature. They concern the settlement of Berostok. Russian forces continue to expand their zone of control north of the Kleban Beek Reservoir. Previously, most of this territory was under Ukrainian control, then transitioned into a so-called grey zone, and at present it is controlled by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It is reported that Russian units advanced approximately 3 kilometers toward Berostok from the Pleshchiivka side. Over the past 24 hours, according to available data, the the control zone was expanded by an additional roughly 1 kilometer in the same direction. It is noted that Russian actions at this stage are of a reconnaissance and probing nature. Russian forces are identifying Ukrainian defensive positions and studying the structure of the defense. It cannot be ruled out that full-scale assault operations may begin here within the next 1 to 2 weeks. For now, the main focus is on reconnaissance and analysis of the enemy's defenses. Reports are also coming in from Kostiantynivka. According to available information, Russian assault units are operating in small groups and advancing in the central part of the city. It is noted that fighters are already entering multi-story buildings located in this area, securing positions within them and gradually expanding the zone of control in favor of the Russian army. At present, there are no confirming materials for this information yet, but such reports continue to emerge. As usually happens, first the news appears, and then 2 to 3 days later, confirmations in the form of objective control are published, after which I make the corresponding changes on the map and provide a detailed explanation of the situation. As of today, the situation here looks exactly like this. Now let us move on to the Sloviansk direction. Changes here concern the settlements of Bondan and Privilia. Let us begin with Privilia. Over the past 24 hours, video footage was received from this area. The footage shows a forward position of the armed forces of the Russian Federation at a strongpoint near Minkivka, coming under fire from the armed forces of Ukraine. At the same time, Russian units advanced along the E40 highway Artemivsk-Sloviansk by more than 1.5 kilometers and occupied new positions. I remind you that Artemivsk is Bakhmut. All territory currently marked in red has come under full Russian control. Forward positions of Russian forces are now located in strongpoints near the road junction. We can see that Russian troops are actively developing the offensive, applying pressure in the directions of Privilia, Holubivka, and Minkivka. In addition, yesterday video footage was received that I had not previously mentioned. It shows Russian artillery strikes on Ukrainian positions located in agricultural buildings in Minkivka. These buildings housed Ukrainian positions, which were struck by Russian artillery. The Ukrainian resource deep state has also reflected the advance of the Russian army in this sector. As of today, changes have also been recorded in the area of the settlement of Bondan. I marked Ivasyukivka together with Bondan on the map, as video footage was received from this area. It shows an attack by a Russian infantry unit toward the settlement of Nikiforivka. Nikiforivka is located precisely here, and at present Russian units are advancing in its direction. One of the Russian assault troops came under fire from the armed forces of Ukraine on the southern outskirts of this settlement. The advance of Russian forces south of Siversk reached up to 5 kilometers. I remind you that Siversk is located here. Previously, this sector belonged to the Siversk direction. However, it has now been included in the Sloviansk direction. Thus, Russian forces expanded their zone of control to a depth of up to 5 kilometers. Earlier, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation had already reported that Bondan and Ivasyukivka had come under Russian control, but at that time no confirming materials from these areas had been received. In addition, reports indicate an expansion of the Russian control zone toward the settlement of Kalaniki. The advance is being carried out from the Reznikivka side. The day before, video footage was obtained from several points in this area. As of today, the Ukrainian resource deep state is also recording an expansion of the control zone here. At this moment, these are all the updates from this direction. Now let us move on to the Lyman sector of the front. Incidentally, this is precisely the direction about which I was actively asked in the comments yesterday, what is happening on the Lyman sector? Today we do have updates along this line of contact. I will say right away, overall, the news here is positive, primarily for the Russian side. Yes, the armed forces of Ukraine also achieved certain successes, but they are extremely minor compared to the advances made by Russian forces. There are no large-scale destructions here, like those we observed, for example, in Chasiv Yar or Toretsk. The reason is that a different combat tactic is currently being used. The offensive is carried out by small infantry groups. In fact, this is exactly how the city of Mirnohrad was taken. Now, directly to the situation on the Lyman direction. If we speak about Ukrainian advances, they look as follows. North of Lyman, Ukrainian forces managed to dislodge Russian fighters from one agricultural outbuilding. In addition, east of Lyman, a forest belt was recaptured, along with two adjacent fields. That is essentially all. The total area of Ukrainian advances in this sector amounted to about 0.7 square kilometers. As I have already noted, this is an extremely modest figure. Now let us turn to Russian advances, and here the situation looks much more serious. The greatest advance was recorded northeast of the city. The depth of the offensive there exceeded 5 kilometers. As a result, a large pocket was eliminated, after which Russian units approached the city closely. Moreover, they did not just approach it, but entered and entrenched themselves, taking control of a large farm known as Elena. In addition, 3 streets in the private housing sector came under Russian control: Podstepna Street, Tsimlyanska Street, and Ostrovskogo Street. Furthermore, most of Shiroka Street was taken, as well as sections of Kazatska Street, Heroev Desantnikiv Street, and Slobozanska Street. Thus, on the outskirts of Lyman, Russian units have entrenched themselves quite firmly, and combat operations for the city are only beginning to gain momentum. In addition to Lyman itself, advances were also recorded in the pocket, between the city and the settlement of Stavki. Here, the depth of advance along forest belts amounted to about 600 meters, with a width of approximately 1.5 kilometers. Also, from the Stavki side, Russian forces advanced south by approximately 2.3 kilometers. The current task is to close all these pockets and establish a continuous line of pressure. After that, pressure on Lyman will become full-scale and extremely serious. Given the forces that the armed forces of Ukraine have in this sector of the front, it will be extremely difficult for them to withstand such pressure. If we sum up specifically the situation on the Lyman sector, Russian forces took control of approximately 14.5 square kilometers of territory during the reporting period, while Ukrainian advances amounted to only 0.7 square kilometers. The difference, as they say, is obvious. Moving on. Now let us deal with the situation in Kupansk Vlovi. I understand that many people are waiting specifically for this part. Formally, it was announced that this urban-type settlement had come under Russian control. However, none of the major mapping resources or OSINT analysts are rushing to mark Kupansk Vlovi as being under Russian control. And as I said yesterday, such map coloring may not correspond to the real situation on the ground, for quite understandable reasons. Over the past several weeks, only one piece of objective control footage has been recorded showing the presence of Russian fighters, and even that was not from Kupansk Vlovi itself, but from the southern part of Podoli, which adjoins it. And that was the only such material. No footage of objective control, combat, or the presence of Russian units has appeared from the center of the settlement, nor from its northern, southern, western, or eastern parts. Is it possible that a settlement of this scale was taken without a single video confirmation? This is extremely doubtful. Yes, one could assume an information blackout on the Russian side, but at the same time there is also no footage from the Ukrainian side, neither drone strikes nor combat engagements. And that simply does not happen. If this were a small village, such a scenario could still be conceivable, but Kupansk Vlovi is a settlement with a pre-war population of around 9,000 people, multi-story residential buildings, an industrial zone, and several railway stations. During real combat operations, there would inevitably be video materials, if not from one side, then at least from the other. However, there are none. This is precisely why no one believed the statement alone. Everyone is waiting for confirming objective control footage. We are waiting for it as well. That is all that can be said at the moment regarding Kupansk Vlovi. Summing up the overall results of the past 24 hours, one settlement and 20.5 square kilometers of territory came under our control. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine recaptured one settlement and occupied 1.4 square kilometers. That is the overall result of the past day. This concludes the Frontline Situation Review. Subscribe to the channel and stay in touch with us.